welcome you to this course. Andre Cohen and our staff have created a well-rounded, researched and engaging course. In this session, we want you to critically examine your biases, worldviews and paradigms so as a leader you can engage old problems with new solutions. With this in mind, let's begin this session. We want to welcome you to this course. Andre Cohen and our staff have created a well-rounded, researched and engaging course. In this session, we want you to critically examine your biases, worldviews and paradigms so as a leader you can engage old problems with new solutions. With this in mind, let's begin this session.
There is dignity and honor in being human. Oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we often talk about it in very esoteric ways. We talk about it in very emotional ways. But typically we never talk about what is the core and the root of what we currently call diversity. So what is dignity? Dignity implies that there is a self-pride as well as a pride that is exuded and offered to other people. So as a part of diversity, there is dignity. There is also honor. Oftentimes, people confuse honor with respect. But honor is respecting at a very high level. Dignity, honor, and respect. There is dignity and honor in being human. What does it mean to be? None of us have done anything to be here on this planet. So we're not more worthy or less worthy than anyone else. We're just here to learn about how to be humans. And lastly, there is dignity and honor in being human. What does it mean to be human? Well, if we look up in the dictionary, we find something very interesting, that there are two definitions for the word human. One being the noun, having thumbs, having a big brain, and walking on two legs, human. But there's also the adjective of being human that describes how we should exist, the things we should do, the ways in which we should interact with each other. There is dignity and honor in being human.
Andre and our staff at AM Horizons Training Group want to discuss the concept of racial implicit bias. This discussion will not only define this concept, but also provide tools that will allow us to mitigate the negative impacts of racial implicit bias to create equitable and egalitarian systems and communities. A few key characteristics of implicit biases. Implicit biases are pervasive. Everyone possesses them, even people with avowed commitments to impartiality, such as judges. Implicit and explicit biases are related but distinct mental constructs. They are not mutually exclusive and may even reinforce each other. The implicit associations we hold do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs, or even reflect stances which we would explicitly endorse. We generally tend to hold implicit biases that favour our own in-group, though research has shown that we can still hold implicit biases against our in-group. Implicit biases are malleable. Our brains are incredibly complex, and the implicit associations that we have formed can gradually be unlearned through a variety of debiasing techniques. What is implicit racial bias? Let's start by deconstructing this concept of race, a political construct. Race is a governing political construct. Put simply, race is a tool used by governments to manage, count, and administer goods, jobs, services, and money. Race has no basis in biological scientific findings, and governments themselves declare that the concepts of race and ethnicity are not often even based on anthropological or sociological observations. More often than not, governments use the common man rule. Whatever the common man say about race is what we declare race to be. Race and ethnic distinctions change from nation-state to nation-state. Data provides guidance in understanding which groups have priority and which lag and languish in the lower rungs of each of those societies. That lag we will later discuss as the basis of disparities. Explicit and implicit bias. Explicit attitudes are attitudes that are at the conscious level, are deliberately formed, and are easy to self-report. On the other hand, implicit mindsets are mindsets that are at the unconscious level and are involuntarily formed and are typically unknown to us. Explicit bias. Explicit bias refers to the attitudes, behaviors, or beliefs that we have about a person or a group on a conscious level. Much of the time, these biases and their expression arise as direct result of a perceived threat. When people feel threatened, they are more likely to draw group boundaries to distinguish themselves from others. People are more likely to express explicit biases when they perceive an individual or group to be a threat to their well-being. Research has shown that white people are more likely to express anti-Muslim prejudice when they perceive national security to be at risk, and express more negative attitudes towards Asian Americans when they perceive an economic threat. When people perceive their biases to be valid, they are more likely to justify unfair treatment or even violence. This unfair treatment can have long-term negative impacts on its victims' physical and mental health. Implicit bias. Unlike explicit bias, which reflects the attitudes or beliefs that one endorses at a conscious level, implicit bias is the bias in judgment and/or behavior that results from subtle cognitive processes, for example, implicit attitudes and implicit stereotypes, that often operate at a level below conscious awareness and without intentional control. Once people are made aware of their own implicit biases, they can begin to consider ways in which to address them. Scientists have uncovered several promising implicit bias intervention strategies that may help individuals who strive to be egalitarian. Consciously acknowledge group and individual differences, i.e., adopt a multiculturalism approach to egalitarianism rather than a colorblindness strategy in which one tries to ignore these differences. Routinely check thought processes and decisions for possible bias, i.e., adopt a thoughtful, deliberative, and self-aware process for inspecting how one's decisions were made. Identify sources of stress and reduce them in the decision-making environment. Identify sources of ambiguity and impose greater structure in the decision-making context. Institute feedback mechanisms. Increase exposure to the stereotyped group members. For example, seek out greater contact with the stigmatized group in a positive context.
So I want to talk about this idea of racial implicit bias. And to really deconstruct that concept, what I like to do is kind of start at the end of that concept and work my way to the front of that concept. And so when we talk about this idea of bias, one of the things that we have to recognize is that bias comes straight out of our adaptation to our context. And so because I come from a particular context, I am biased. And once we're aware of the context by which we come, then we can understand our bias. So here's an example. So I have a farmer in southern Minnesota, and there's a certain amount of intelligence that farmer has to be effective on that farm. The farmer has to recognize how to manage animal husbandry. The farmer has to understand the cycles of agriculture. The farmer has to know how to fix machinery. And so there's a certain kind of bias that the farmer has. And so when even the work ethic that goes along with being a person who works the land gives that farmer a certain kind of bias coming out of a particular context. And so when we talk about this idea of bias, we have to talk about the context that the bias comes out of. And so if that farmer was to move to New York City, he would run into some clashes and he would be biased towards his old context. And so his old context might make it difficult for him to adapt to the new context. However, the farmer, being an intelligent individual, could adapt to that new context. The same would be said for that person who left New York and went to the farmer's land in southern Minnesota, that his old context had created bias for him. So in this new context, he may have some difficulties adapting. And so when we talk about this idea of bias, we have to talk about the context by which the bias was developed, right? So we develop biases based on the context by which we come from. So context is everything, but we'll talk more about that later. So this idea of what it means, something means to be implicit. Well, we understand what it means to be explicit. Explicit meaning that everybody can see it, everybody can recognize it. It is outwardly moving in the world, on display for everyone to see. It is explicit. It is verbalized. It is actionable. It is seen through people's behavior. It is explicit. So then when we talk about this idea of implicit, what does that actually mean? What it means is that you and I have, because of the context that we come from, not only these explicit biases, but we also have implicit biases. We have things that we've picked up, nuances that people haven't sat down and said, here are the rules about these other groups of people or how to interact with the world, but we've picked those up. So an example is, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but growing up, when I was in neighborhoods that did not think I should have been in the neighborhoods, people didn't necessarily say mean things, but I found it interesting when I would see people in their cars and in their trucks rev their engines as I passed by. That wasn't racist. It wasn't discriminatory, but it certainly sent a message about what I was supposed to, or how I was supposed to be in that particular space. And so when we talk about these implicit biases, we have to talk about, again, the context by which these biases come from. And so the way we even talk about this idea of race relations, we have to identify that we come from a context that is preloaded with lots of stuff. And that the way that we use language and the language that we use becomes very important in how that impacts our implicit bias. And so
It's important for us to recognize that our values, our paradigms, and our contexts are very much related, that those three things are very much related, and that our values are connected to the context by which we operate, and our context informs our values, and both of those things come together to form the central pieces for how we see the world, our paradigms, or our worldview. And when we look at those three things in concert, if we can recognize that other people are operating under those same constraints, then we can get a better sense of who those individuals are. When we understand that everyone is looking for safety, significance, and belonging, but their methods may be different given their context, we're much apt, or we're more likely to give them the grace that other folks have given us. When we're not able to see those things as being humanly neutral or humanly important, that looking for safety, significance, and belonging, and that we're trying to establish those things or redefine those things with our values, with our context, and with our paradigm, when we can't make those leaps, then the grace becomes damnation. We turn people from human beings into things when we can't see that we're looking and trying to gain similar things but our processes may in fact be a bit different in how we get this.
So diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are more modern buzzwords for what we used to just call diversity. And so what I like to do is make some distinctions between those three concepts. The first concept being diversity. Diversity is a legal term that is measured by governments to basically determine who is in the room, who's in the workplace, who's in, how are we counting these people? What is the census of those individuals? When we talk about the diversity, we talk about the law and we talk about the who, as it relates to the law. Secondly, when we talk about this idea of equity, we talk about our intentions. What do we intend to do? How do we intend to make our systems beneficial to all those who are involved based on what they need as opposed to what we can offer? So how do we give people what they need versus just offering them whatever we want to offer them? And so that becomes really about the intent. So equity is about the intent and the how do we go about doing that. Diversity is law and the who. Equity is intent and how. And inclusion is about the impact. So how, because we've done those other two things, we've counted the who, we have decided, how we're going to do that. Ultimately, what is it that we will do, or what does our organization look like now that we have done these things and we've included these people?
Implicit bias will be defined and examples will be provided in this session to better correct the harm caused outside.
So what do we call that rich chocolate dessert? The one that's chocolate. We call it devil's food cake. What do we call the light, fluffy dessert? We call that angel food cake. As you think about those particular concepts and what those particular things mean, at least for me, what that starts to say is that what we've done is we've created a paradigm where we start to equate colors.
Tell us that people look different. No one has trouble distinguishing a Czech from a Chinese. However, we may have difficulty with the determination of someone from Pakistan and another from India. But what do these differences mean? What is it that marks the end of one race of people and the beginning of another? It is clear that we have differences in our appearances. No shape, hair texture and skin colour, but are physical characteristics clues to human potential? Is there a direct correlation between a thin nose and the moral development of a group of people? Can I with certainty know what a human group is capable of by looking at their genes or phenotype? It is clear that people have a need for experiencing the world in different ways. How we express our uniqueness comes from in large part from the social, political and geographic regions from which we come. Each of our cultures have attempted to the best of their ability to make sense of the world around them. For example, groups of people who adapted to warmer climates may define that value of time differently than those where the climate was often more hostile and growing seasons shorter. Culture's job is to create an atmosphere where the most valuable and strongest memes can be carried from one generation to the next. Memes are the physiological equivalent to genes. They are the simplest forms of thought. Acculturation happens so that the time-tested and proven ways of looking at the world, ways of surviving and the meaning that existence has come, ensures the successful continuation of the human species. The meme within. A meme is the psychological equivalent of a biological cell. Much like a cell, memes are organized to adapt and pass along the most beneficial and constructive trait of the organism they are a part of. Memes are the mental construct that people have found success with, and so they get passed from one generation to the next, building, adapting and changing as a need arises. We have created a number of ways to define our existence so that we continue the species, religion, government, social mores and gender roles, just to name a few. Our memes help to drive and procreate these successful interpretations of the world. We have also collected and added things or altered things from our past that no longer make sense. Many of our customs, rites and rituals have become acts of obedience and have lost their relevance, or we have forgotten their relevance and value. These customs are ways that our memes can be protected and preserved for our descendants. One of our more recent and prevailing memes is the concept of race. Memes can be so dynamic that they can either take centuries to develop or a few short months. Race as a meme or mental construct has been around for about 200 years. Race is one of those concepts that we have collected and added to our human consciousness without really understanding its purpose or the effect it has and will on generations to come. Our meme power and light comes from the success that individuals have as a result of the belief in that the meme and the thought either infects others or is developed out of the need for adapting to a new and changing world. Mark my words, we see because we believe we see. Our memes or the memes given to us have produced a false reality, a 3D hologram that we call race. Opportunity has nothing to do with race. The geographic regions where we have developed our culture has nothing to do with race. We have greater control over what we think than most of us realise. We attract and adapt to the environment mentally and well as physically. We collect memes that work for us, that serve us and work on our behalf. However, what the landscape of our world shifts, it is important that we make those shifts as well. We must actively create new memes, pass along the values and morals that we want generations of humans to inherit. Remember.
So what is race in the United States? Well, the federal government gives us some guideline for how to look at race in America. Standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity. This classification provides a minimum standard for maintaining, collecting, and presenting data on race and ethnicity for all federal reporting purposes. The categories in this classification are social-political constructs and should not be interpreted as being scientific or anthropological in nature. They are not to be used as determinants of eligibility for participation in any federal program. The standards have been developed to provide a common language for uniformity and comparability in the collection and use of data on race and ethnicity by federal agencies. The standards have 5 categories for data on race: American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. There are two categories for data on ethnicity: Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino. Categories and definitions. The minimum categories for data on race and ethnicity for federal statistics, program administrative reporting, and civil rights compliance reporting are defined as follows. American Indian or Alaska Native, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America, including Central America, and who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. Asian, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippine Islands, Thailand, and Vietnam. Black or African American, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. Terms such as Haitian or Negro can be used in addition to Black or African American. Hispanic or Latino, a person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture of origin, regardless of race. The term Spanish origin can be used in addition to Hispanic or Latino. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific Islands. White, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. As you look at these definitions, I want you to ask yourself a few questions. What is problematic about these distinctions? Why do you think these categories were created? What human groups are left out of these governmental categories? How should people who share more than one category be grouped?
Microinequity, the power of nothing. Session objectives. Define and identify micro-messages, micro-affirmations, and micro-inequities. Demonstrate technique for converting micro-inequities into micro-affirmations. Analyze impact of micro-inequities on office culture or community perceptions regarding the fairness, integrity, and reliability of organizations and political systems. Human communication. How is it that humans communicate? How do humans communicate? Most often, people will say that they communicate with words. And I want to say that is only part of how we communicate. And actually, that is not the most important way in which we communicate. And so, what I'd like to offer you is this experiment. And I want you to try this. Try this right where you are. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to say the word apple. Close your eyes. All right, when you've said the word apple, you can open your eyes now. When you said the word apple, what images came up for you? Some of you may have seen a red apple. Some of you may have seen a green apple. And some of you may have seen a computer. There's always one of those people in the group, right? So you see all those images. And so, what do all of those images mean? How did that happen? Because I didn't say anything about a red apple. I didn't say anything about a green apple. Maybe you saw an apple with a stem. Maybe you saw one with a leaf. I didn't say anything about any of those. So how did you come up with that? The secret to human communication is, in fact, this. Humans use words to communicate thoughts. So how do we communicate? We actually communicate telepathically. I am sending thoughts from my mind to yours. I am sending my thoughts to you using these containers, these packages called words. And so, when I use these words to transmit my thoughts to you, I have to be very particular about the words that I use, because you'll get a particular package that I've sent. For example, the fact that I said apple gave you a certain image in your mind. Had I said rotten apple, you would have gotten a different image, or a different package in your mind. So why is that important? Why are the images that we generate, the ways that we talk to ourselves, or to other people, why is that important? Because the words that we create images for other people, which stimulates their emotions. Now, have you ever heard someone say that a picture is worth 1,000 words? Why do you think that is? Why is a picture worth 1,000 words? Because it communicates something on a level that words can't capture. Have you been to a museum, or seen a picture, or even just looked at a baby, or you were out in nature, and you were just so in awe of everything that was happening, you couldn't describe in words exactly what you were saying? Yeah, I've been there. So, words create images. Images stimulate our emotions, and our emotions dictate our behaviors. And oftentimes, what you'll hear people say is, I don't feel like doing a thing. And guess what? They don't feel like doing that thing because it's not a part of them. They can't do it because it's not a part of who they are. It's not a part of their nature. And so, when we talk about how to communicate, it becomes very important. The words that we use, because they create pictures for us that stimulate our emotions, that ultimately dictate our behaviors. Trigger alert. If
How was your weekend?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, mine was pretty good too. We went to the lake.
Well, I'm ready for spring. Yes.
Well, I could do some with you. Yeah, it was a lot of work.
That certainly was interesting. Do you think that dignity, honor, or respect was given in that situation? If you walked in on that situation, how would you feel? If you were passing by that situation, what would you say? What impact do you think that interaction would have on the culture of respect? Would the behaviors in that scenario increase or decrease discretionary effort?
So discretionary effort. How is it that you've come to work in whatever organization that you work in? Did you, did someone do you a favor? Did you just show up and they did you a favor and say, hey, come on in to this organization? Chances are probably not. And unless you're an entrepreneur and you make things happen, that's super. But most of us have a contract that we either signed or that we've committed to, that I will do X amount of work for an X amount of pay, and I will do certain things, and then there are definitely things that are out of my frame of reference that I won't be responsible for. So we have what we call a job description, and typically individuals, and Dr. William Glasser talked about this a lot in his choice theory. And basically, I'll sum up his choice theory by saying this: that people do what they want, when they want, and only when they want to do it. That's basically the crux of his choice theory. And so when we sign those contracts, or when we come into a relationship with an employer, we have told that employer that I will do the job. I will do what's asked of me. I will make the number of widgets. I will think in a certain way. I'll use your processes, all sorts of things. These are the things that we agree to in contract with our employer. So, given that, most of us try to live up to those contracts. We try to do what's asked of us, and we try to do the best we can to comply with those contracts. And so how does this relate to discretionary effort? Discretionary effort is not saying that I won't comply with the contract. I will comply with the contract. But the level at which I choose to give to that contract is up to me. I can keep my job doing 70% of what I'm supposed to do. So I can perform at 70%, and that will be adequate to fulfill my contract. But what does my employer want from me? How do I get raises? How do other people see me as being valuable in the organization? Is it giving 70%? Do you know people in your organization that give 70%? What are the things that people think about them? Typically not real positive, or they don't typically fall into the category of the go-to person, if you know what I'm saying, right? So how do we operate when we're in 70%? We do as little as possible to fulfill our contract. And so discretionary effort says that I can do between 70% and 100% to fulfill my contract. But that's up to me. And what is that discretionary effort based on? It's based on my attitude. Am I accomplishing my goals? And some of my goals are directly related to the organization, and some of my goals are directly related to my relationships with people within the organization. And so when I'm able to accomplish my goal, when I have the right tools, I have the right atmosphere, I have the right support, I'm able and I desire to fulfill my contract at 100%. However, when I don't have the right resources and the environment that I have around me is poor, be it a physical environment or be it an attitudinal environment, if I'm being harassed, if I'm being belittled, what kind of percentage do you think I'm going to give to my organization? I'm going to do as little as possible. Now, this is what's really interesting. As a high school teacher, when my students were upset with me, they would punish me by not doing their homework. Yes, their punishment for the teacher was not doing their homework. Now, the interesting thing is that didn't work. They weren't punishing me. But they thought that through displaying those negative attitudes that they would actually get their goal, that my behavior would change.
When in fact, what would happen is that they would be the negative recipients of the choices and the behaviors that they exhibited. And so a lot of times, our discretionary effort is stuff based on our attitude that doesn't necessarily get us what we want. However, I can't, as a manager, as a supervisor, as a teacher, as a coach, I can't make my students do anything. They ultimately do what they want to do. And so one of the things that I've learned in terms of discretionary effort is that first I must understand what people's goals are. So I do a little investigative process. I give them assessments. I want to find out where their strengths are, how we build on those strengths, and what kinds of tools do I need to give them so that they can A, use their strengths, and B, so that they can accomplish their ultimate goals. So that's extremely important as a manager and supervisor and teacher, to make sure that I know what those goals are, so I can help people achieve their goals, so that they can have a good attitude and increase their discretionary effort. The other part is that it's important to realize that let me use this parable. How does one catch fish? You typically take a rod and a reel, and you have a hook, and you put something on the hook, and you cast that hook into the water, and at some point you hope that a fish bites it. All right. So if I'm going fishing and I just happen to have a Doritos bag, and I put a Doritos bag on the hook, and I cast that into the lake, will I be catching fish? Okay, will fish be caught? Maybe if they swim into the bag or something like that. But more than likely, that's probably not going to catch fish. And as a matter of fact, I will not see myself ever on the Bass Pro Show on Saturday afternoon if I keep using Doritos bags as bait. And why is it that Doritos bags may not be necessarily good bait for me to use in trying to catch fish? Because fish aren't drawn to Doritos bags. Now, if I had, depending on the fish, I could have a synthetic lure, or I could get a night crawler, or I can get some dough and cast that into the water. And what will happen with the fish? The fish will be drawn to that thing. And so ultimately, I have to convince the fish that they want to be caught. I mean, I can't just yell into the water, "Fish, get in my boat!" No. I have to cast out a net, or I have to send out a bait that ultimately becomes a contract between the fish and I, and the fish says, "I want to be caught because I want that thing that you have." And so once I have that fish on the hook, then I have that fish caught. And so when we talk about discretionary effort, not only do we need to understand individuals' goals, we need to understand what their needs, what their strengths are, how we can help them use those strengths, but we also have to have an atmosphere where they want to contribute to what we're doing. And so when we talk about racism, a lot of times we talk about that emotional stuff, but what I want to talk about is its impact on one's discretionary effort. If I'm in an environment where sexism is rampant, am I a person that wants to give 100%? Probably not. If I'm an individual where there is homophobia or religious bias or sexual harassment or racism or sizeism, if you will, if I'm in an environment where those things are happening, am I prepared to give my organization my personal best? Probably not. And so when we talk about discretionary effort, the effort on the individual is something that we can't determine. But if we give that fish, in a sense, the right materials, the right resources, the right environment, the right rewards, both intrinsically and extrinsically, we will start to create an environment where we can expect to get 100% because people will want to give 100%. And am I able to give 100% of the time? I would probably venture to say no. But
On average, I would prefer that my employees strive to give me 100%, have an environment that fosters that concept that I can give 100% and that it's worth it to give 100% than I would for them just to complete or comply with their contract. Discretionary effort impacts how we and why we decide to be motivated in our workplaces. I'm Andre Cohen. I'll see you next chapter.
Cursing and swear words are accepted, tolerated, or excused as stress relievers, your organization is ripe for micro-inequalities and may also be experiencing prejudicial behaviors or discriminatory practices. Micro-messages. Small, sometimes unspoken, and often unconscious messages that are constantly sent and received. They can have a powerful impact on our interactions with others. Microaffirmations, microaggression, micro-insults, and micro-inequalities. Microaffirmations convey inclusion, respect, trust, and a genuine willingness to see others succeed. May lead to a more productive and efficient work environment where all members feel valued and enjoy work. For example, a manager greets every member of a trial team in the morning by name. Prosecutor greets victim by name at court hearing. Defender greets client and client family members by name. Microinequities. Microinequity is a theory that refers to hypnotized ways in which individuals are either singled out, overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on an unchangeable characteristic such as race or gender. In 1973, while researching racial and gender exclusion in the workplace, Mary Rowe, PhD, discovered that women and people of colour were bothered by subtle, seemingly harmless messages of devaluation that kept them from flourishing. Microinequities are the ways in which individuals are either singled out, overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on an unchangeable characteristic such as race or gender. Usually take form in slight difference of language, gesture, treatment, or even tone of voice. Are often subconsciously given, but can have a huge impact on a work environment or social structure. May lead to the perception of discrimination or harassment. Are frequently unrecognized by the perpetrator. For example, rolling eyes or sighing when someone considered different is speaking. Manager walks down a hall and doesn't acknowledge coworkers or subordinates. Not paying attention in meetings when a certain person is sharing an idea. For example, staff person, usually of difference, shares an idea and no one responds. Same idea is repeated by someone else and everyone acknowledges. Exclusion of environmental factors that represent a certain group. For example, decorations, literature, or artwork. Constantly being interrupted while you're talking. Being left out of a discussion or project. Trying to speak with someone who is reading or sending emails during a conversation. Talking with someone who keeps looking at his or her watch. Not being introduced in a meeting and then being ignored. For example, some individuals receive microaffirmations, but others do not. Gesture of affection or praise for one colleague, but not another. Supervisor chats frequently with one employee, but not another. Colleague invites some office mates to lunch, but not others. Small, but powerful. What activates our implicit bias into microinequities? Our biases are most likely to be activated by 5 key conditions. They are real or perceived stress or conflict, a time-focused task or time constraints, busy work, multitasking, lack of promotion of curiosity, perception of resource scarcity. What are affirmations? Affirmations refer primarily to the practice of positive thinking and self-empowerment, fostering a belief that a positive mental attitude supported by affirmations will achieve success in anything. To ratify and accept avoidable transaction. To state or assert positively, maintain as true. To express agreement with or commitment to, uphold, support. Affirmations can boost morale, create supportive environments, productive atmosphere, and build consistency. Inequities erode self-esteem and ability to perform, create feelings of exclusion. Strategies. Intentionally infuse micro-affirmations into daily behavior. Role model. Enhance understanding of the psychological basis of bias and its impact on customer service and civil rights of people and groups. Replace negative mental images of the target group with positive mental images through appropriate cultural icons and artifacts in public spaces. Increase positive contacts with socially dissimilar groups, both as service providers as well as internal staff structures. Increase effective empathy and perspective, talking toward outgroups. Creating networks of caucus groups, focusing on education of ability, cultural, or ethnic differences. Work with target group members to achieve common organizational tasks or goals. Ad hoc or focus groups can be created to assure that all voices are a part of critical mission delivery. Replace tolerance behaviors with acceptance and appreciation behaviors. Shift from microinequities to microaffirmations. Recognize movement along the Burnett cultural competence continuum. Analyze personal patterns of privilege in light of the recognition of the limiting nature of developmental contexts. Who do you micromanage? Get 360-degree diversity feedback from diverse members of your work team, organization, or persons you trust. Practice, collect, monitor, and evaluate personal or professional diversity-related decision metrics. How frequently do you recruit, hire, mentor, or promote target group employees? Obtain a target member coach, diversity professional, or accountability partner from outside your work group, organization, or family.
Thinking about the principle. Now that you have viewed today's principle, we would like for you to reflect on those concepts by responding to these questions. Question number 1. What do you believe was the core message in this lesson? Question number 2. What principles were addressed? Question number 3. How might you apply these principles to your life? Question number 4. What might be the impact on others if you use these principles? As you reflect on these questions, write your responses down in your journal. Re-watch these principles and watch your life unfold in amazing ways. At AM Horizons Training Group, we look forward to seeing who you become.
I just want to say thank you for joining us here at AM Horizons Training Group. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us, and you can reach me at andre@amhorizons.com.
Or you can give us a call at 651-998-9376. We look forward to helping you nurture your seeds of change.